So again, welcome everyone. My name is Rachel Coleman. I am the Associate Director of Graduate Student Services at the Duke Career Center. And today what we're doing is putting on a panel about navigating career uncertainty. Understand that with everything that's going on right now, it's a difficult, challenging job market. There's definitely some uncertainty. There's a lot of changes going on. So we're very fortunate to have an excellent panel of alums who graduated in '08 from their respective program. And they're going to share with you a couple of their experiences, their perspective, what times were like for them, advice that they have, resources, and just anything else that they want to share from their experience graduating in 2008. So the way that the panel is going to run, I have a series of questions to start us off. And then with whatever time we have remaining, I would definitely encourage you to ask your questions. You're welcome to use the chat feature, or you can raise your hand and we can open it up to floor questions. But to begin, the panelists we have today, and maybe we could just give a little wave. We have Dr. Sarah Taylor Ellis with us today. Cristian Liu. Robyn Taylor, and Dr. Mike Quigley. Okay, so thank you all so much for being here. I am going to start with the first question. And I would like if you could just each introduce yourselves and give us a little bit more about your background and what your circumstances were like as you were graduating from Duke. Robyn, do you mind if we start with you?
Of course, I'd be happy to. As Rachel mentioned, my name is Robyn Taylor, and I graduated from Trinity in 2008 with a degree in political science. And so when I was in college, I knew I would probably go to law school, but that I wasn't entirely sure. And so I did a summer at an investment bank called Lehman Brothers, which went under. I didn't end up going there, so that worked out for me. And I ended up pivoting to management consulting. I thought it was an interesting industry and really wanted to try it after school. And I kind of knew if I wanted to do that job post-college was the time to do it. So that was kind of my mindset graduating. I was going to do consulting for 2 years and then figure out if I wanted to go to law school. I knew about a year in that I thought law school was the best pivot for me. So that's what I did. I ended up applying to and attending law school. So my mindset was kind of twofold graduating. It was both, oh gosh, there's a recession going on. I am grateful that I have a job. Especially because I had classmates who were getting, furloughed or laid off or other things, but also really kind of making sure I was putting myself in the best position to apply to law school when the economy was starting to get a little bit better in 2010.
Thank you so much. Cristian?
Yeah, sure. Happy to give a little bit of a background. So I graduated from Pratt in 2008. With a degree in electrical, computer, and biomedical engineering. And I always, way back in the day, thought that I would be an engineer. I'm not currently an engineer, and so clearly things have changed. But very much similar to Robyn, I remember looking at my classmates who were interning at Lehman Brothers and at Credit Suisse. And during that time, I think a lot of them had their full-time offers pulled. And also I knew a lot of folks in 2009 who were just not able to score or get any internships or career opportunities coming out of that, which was really challenging. I think for me, so fun fact is I did my work study at the Career Center at Duke, and so did a fair amount of work like in the office trying to figure out how to make that happen, and got some really great advice from the career advisors there, which was basically to figure out what it was that I wanted to do and focus in on trying to network and find alums and meet people that would be able to help me through my career, whether it was anything that was directly job related or even if it was just an open networking request. And that was really helpful for me and made sure that I was being open-minded about meeting folks. I ultimately ended up in a software development job with my engineering degree and realized shortly a year into it that I really hated software development. And so I quickly began to pivot and think about a way to get into business school, which is where I ended up. And then much like Robyn did management consulting, and then now I'm at Google. And so that's kind of was my story out of that.
Very nice. Thank you. And I appreciate the little Career Center plug there. That was unexpected. Thanks. Sarah, do you mind going next?
Sure. I also graduated from Trinity in 2008. I got degrees in English, music, and theater because I couldn't make up my mind. So I kind of wrapped it all up into one big. I write musicals now, so that's kind of how everything landed. I knew that I wanted to go to grad school right after undergrad. I had not been out of a school system my entire life. I liked the structure of school. I had just discovered musical theater really at Duke. And just discovered my passion for theater and knew that I wanted to study it further. So in 2008, I had a backup plan in terms of jobs if I didn't get into grad school, but I applied to about a dozen programs, a mix of master's and PhD programs, a mix of English and theater programs. The big concern for me was, I think similar to everyone, finances. A lot of master's programs were unfunded. I got into several of those. I was very lucky and I got into one PhD program that was fully funded. So I ended up going to UCLA for a PhD in theater and performance studies. And that was a great combination of sort of fellowships and teaching assistantships, as well as research positions that carried me through my 5 years doing a PhD. During my final dissertation year in 2013, I moved to New York City because I knew that I wanted to end up there. I love academia and I still am active in the academic scene, but I realized that going into academia was actually not the right path for me. I had too many other creative pursuits that I also wanted to make sure were a part of my life. So in New York, I sort of fell into teaching artistry. And teaching artistry is essentially going into underprivileged schools that wouldn't have access to arts education otherwise, collaborating with classroom teachers and bringing curriculum to life through the arts. So I worked with Roundabout Theater Company and the Metropolitan Opera Guild, Harlem School of the Arts, and did a lot of really inventive curriculum design. That led me to a full-time job at a girls' school on the Upper East Side, which is familiar to many people from Gossip Girl, but I promise it's nothing like it. The Nightingale Bamford School. And I started out as an accompanist there. They realized that I was a composer and they ended up hiring me to start a music composition program at the school. So music composition is not often part of the curriculum in the US. It is in the UK. I ended up founding this music composition program that's still going today at this girls' school. I've had a strange journey in the past couple of years. After being in New York, I decided my husband and I really love the theater scene in London. And so we ended up moving to the UK. I did 1 year at a university. I did not like it. Academia was truly not the right path for me. I just was in London teaching at Arts Ed, which is a performing arts school. And I was explaining to the panel earlier, I'm in my own moment of sort of navigating career uncertainty. I was head of music at this performing arts school that returned this fall with no masks, no social distancing, full-on performances. I made the hard decision to leave, which was the right decision, especially since my husband's higher risk, but definitely challenging because I love that job. I was simultaneously, I've talked a lot about the teaching. That's the source of income for me, but I write musicals and have several shows in development with Pittsburgh CLO. I worked at the National Theater this past year. I've had lots of great opportunities in composing as well and was excited to be a part of the theater scene in London. But it was not worth health and not worth the risk of sort of potentially being a vector of infection for someone who is more vulnerable than myself. So my husband and I just relocated to Berlin. So I'm in my process now of, I've got a few tutoring gigs, I've got some composing gigs, and I'm starting to pull it together again as a freelance composer, tutor, and teaching artist.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I appreciate also your willingness to share a little bit of what's going on with you personally. That's, I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with that. So thank you. Mike, can we ask you to say a few words?
Sure. Good afternoon. Good evening, Sarah. You might be the latest of all of us. I might be the earliest on the West Coast. Cristian, I'm not sure where you are with Google. I'm good to be here. Mike Quigley, I also obviously ended in 2008 at Duke from the graduate school. So I finished up my PhD work in immunology there. maybe a bit distinct in terms of career path and sort of considerations, at least in the biomedical track, is so I knew very much so that, leaving Duke or finishing up my PhD, I did not want to sort of entertain a career in academia. And so at that point in time, given the market was searching around for sort of pharmaceutical, biotech jobs, given the market conditions, obviously, unlike what they are today, I think, and we can come back to that if there's interest, there wasn't a lot of money to be had in sort of new companies in the biopharma industry and obviously larger companies in terms of pulling back from the general financial issues of the time. And so I had actually 2 offers pulled from biopharma companies, but thankfully at the same time was also sort of interviewing for academic postdocs. And I will say, sort of besides sort of general issues in academia and funding thereof, biomedical track, that was sort of a source at the time of stability. And so wound up sort of approaching it by 2 means: 1, stability, but 2, with the mentality of a path that would not close any doors. And so in the biomedical sort of realm, and the academic postdoc certainly doesn't close any doors from a career path, at least along those scientific tracks or otherwise. Did dabble, like Robyn and Cristian, with some the notion of management consulting, but it wasn't for me, just even conceptually. So did an academic postdoc, actually a fairly short one, just a couple of years up in Boston in the Harvard system. At that point in time, in 2010, things started to pull back for some of the large pharmas in terms of balance sheets and sort of projected outlook and things. And so I actually made the jump into industry in the biopharma sort of R&D efforts, and that's where I've been since. So been east and west a few times, and now back on the West Coast in the Bay Area.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I hope our participants can see why our panelists are here. They have such unique, interesting, fascinating backgrounds, and I think that they're going to have a lot of great perspectives to share with you today. So I'd like to kick off with our first question, and this one is open to whomever would like to respond. But several of you noted that at the time you were graduating, offers were being rescinded. You were seeing peers not getting, not getting jobs, not being or having their offers pulled. What did you find to be most helpful for your search at that time as you're watching kind of other people struggle with these challenges? What would you say you relied on the most as you were trying to make that transition? And again, I'll open this one up to anybody who wants to start.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in, and I alluded to this before, and so it's a little bit of a nod to the Duke Career Center and the help that I received through the organization. And so I highly encourage folks to go interact and talk with the advisors that are in the Duke Career Center, because it really helped me, not so much in the, hey, here's a list of jobs, go apply for them type of way, but here's how you should frame your search. Here's the way that you should tell your story. Let's make sure that the things that are unique about you are shining through in the way that you are presenting yourself when networking with people, when talking to folks in an interview. And I think that was the most helpful thing for me, because there was a little bit of an air of, oh crap, I need a job. How do I get one? I just need to talk to enough people to get a job. And so that doesn't usually work when you're scattershotting the approach. And so for me, it was really helpful to talk to my career advisor at the time and talk to the folks and really get an understanding of what is the value that I think I bring to a company, what is the unique aspect that I can bring to the table, and then share that with folks in a networking experience to then further that conversation. So that was it for me.
Cristian, you hit on it earlier, and maybe it goes without saying, it'll be obvious to this team, network, right? I can tell you, at least biomedical science, we're not trained to be very personable. Get out of that shell. I think it becomes a numbers game then, just as is now, and actually always. So the Duke network for me, at least in the circle that I found myself, was incredibly valuable to sort of branch out, to think about whether London sort of approach would be the right time, or abroad in general, or some of the other academic sort of hubs within the U.S. Those connections exist certainly in my field at Duke, and it was invaluable.
I would also add, kind of have a few tracks going. So you want to be open-minded, but still focused. And I should also mention, I also worked at the Duke Career Center when I was in college. It was also my work study, which I found to be just really, really invaluable. So that's a really great resource. But I kind of knew I was going to go after management consulting, and that I was also applying to law school. And If consulting didn't work out, my plan, I had pushed back the LSAT, but my plan was to take the LSAT the spring of my senior year, and to frankly then kind of go home and work on my college application or my law school applications. And I realize it's a privilege that everyone has to kind of go home. But I would also caution you, because I think at that time, a lot of people were just so stressed out and this is going to be my entire career. I have to do it. I have to do it now. You have time. It will be okay. If you don't find that perfect first job, you're going to have time to pivot. And that's what my parents were definitely telling me was, you know what, Robyn, if you can't get the job you want, come home, study for the LSAT, and you'll apply to law school. And you can do something in that interim 1 year. And that really kind of took the pressure off, especially as my friends were getting jobs before I did. And then my friends were getting into law school programs. And I was like, oh gosh, what's my future going to be? So certainly a privilege, but it was definitely something that was really kind of good for me mentally that last year.
It's interesting hearing everyone's stories because none of us had a linear approach to careers. And I think coming out of Duke, you often have a very linear approach to where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to be doing, and you're going to find the job that you're going to do for the rest of your life, which I think is true for our parents' generation and for our grandparents' generation in particular. I think that in the 21st century, right, we're freelancers, we're gig workers. We often move from company to company or from different fields even. We're much more flexible. And I think that's actually a great asset. So don't feel like your first job coming out has to be, like Robyn was saying, sort of the end all be all. It's a first job and you might discover something within it that's a little nugget of truth for you that you can carry with you to a different career or a different area of study. But I think the more flexible you can be and the more open-minded, the better, especially for a first job.
Thank you all so much. I think you all hit on amazing points. I want to explore this idea of this flexibility and adaptability a little bit more in terms of your mindset. Can anybody speak to, in the spirit of staying flexible, recognizing there's challenges ahead, I need to be adaptable, what did that look like for you in terms of a mindset? How did you approach the process? And what examples maybe could you give our participants that might help it be just a little bit more concrete on what that means?
I think in my instance, it meant sometimes taking work that even people who were interviewing me would say is, below my skill set and below the level that I should be working or teaching. So the girls' school where I started work, I started as an accompanist on an hourly rate. And for my first year, I was a part-time accompanist for them. And it was through getting to know me that other opportunities and other doors started opening at that school. By the end, I was directing plays with the students. I was, spearheading a music composition program. So I think as much as anything, for me, it was about recognizing, okay, here's something that I'm good at, and this is a foot in the door. And then once they realize what I'm capable of, then something great may emerge from that opportunity.
Maybe what I can offer is, and it's more sort of in retrospect, relates to what Robyn mentioned earlier around sort of viewing, at least what I've done a view career in sort of increments. For me, it's sort of that 2-year reassessment point. Not that anything needs to change, but the exponential learning curve of any role. So to Sarah's point, no matter where you might find yourself in a hierarchy, I think you can take things away from it. And I think that's the way in a stepwise fashion, whether it's applying to law school, taking your time, or sort of getting your foot in the door. That's something that still stands with me today. Reassess for me, couple of years, whatever makes sense for anyone here. And to ask sort of what you can continue to learn in that situation. That's the way I would approach it coming out, or I did anyway, coming out of grad school.
I can see why Mike considered consulting, because that's exactly what consultants do as well. Every 2 years, they reevaluate whether or not they're in the right field. So it definitely resonates. And I think for me, the way that I thought about flexibility was, as long as I'm reasonably pointed in the direction of things that I want to work in, I think that's what really mattered to me. So coming out of Duke, one of the things that I really wanted to work in, or I thought, was technology. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go work at Red Hat and do some technology and software development. Realized I really didn't like it. And so I did some soul searching and was like, okay, what is it that I really want to do? And so I ended up in healthcare policy, and just kind of have been on that track for a while. And the way that I thought about flexibility in that point of view was, look, I don't actually care which function in healthcare am doing. Like I was started out in policy and then I moved into consulting and now I'm doing more strategy work and some product stuff, right? And so from a functional perspective, it didn't matter as much to me as long as I was kind of pointed in that right direction. And so having that flexibility and then also thinking about it in terms of geography and whether or not you're open to geographical flexibility is also really important, because even if, you know, some things aren't popping here in the US, maybe there's something popping abroad. If things aren't popping abroad, maybe they're, you know, you can go somewhere else and take a look, because there's always some interesting opportunities if you're open to that sort of flexibility.
Thank you. Those are all great. I appreciate the examples because we get that question from students sometimes of what exactly does that look like in practice. So thank you so much for sharing what your experiences were with that. I noticed that a couple of you, thank you again to Robyn and Cristian for the Career Center plugs. Were there any other resources that you found particularly helpful around the time of graduation, things that you might recommend, anything that was Duke or non-Duke related that you felt just really made a difference in your transition at that point?
I spoke to alums a lot. There was and I can't remember the name of it now, like a Duke program where alums could like upload their profile and then students would reach out. I'm on it. I haven't been contacted in multiple years because I've been out of consulting for a long time, but I used to get all sorts of calls from Duke undergrads and we would do mock cases as they were prepping for interviews. But I spoke with a lot of alums and someone told me really sage advice. I forget who it was, but basically when you're a student, people are so eager to help you. When you're a recent graduate, people are so eager to help you. They are just so excited because they remember that time in their life and they want to kind of help direct your path and for you to avoid the pitfalls that they did. So I did a lot of conversations with alums around, what is this management consulting? What is this like? What's the travel like? I think I may want to go to law school. Should I be candid about that? The answer was no. When I want to go to law school, you know, what kind of lawyer should I be? And having those conversations really helped me because I didn't come from a family where people have those kinds of careers. And so it really was this great way to kind of have an extended network where I could learn about them.
I would add to that professors who have become mentors to you, stay in touch with them. John Klum, who was the head of the theater department at the time, he was the first to read my book that's about to come out. You know, he sent me extensive notes. Professors that you've been close with, they absolutely want to stay in touch with you and they will continue to work with you and to support you through the rest of your life. And even as I've moved to Berlin, you know, I'm no longer a student at Duke, but I immediately reached out to Blue Devils that I knew were here. So Dan Karslake, who's a filmmaker, he had been a guest at my Duke in New York program in 2006, and I remembered him. He didn't remember me, of course, but as soon as I got here, I reached out to him and we took a nice walk together the other day. The network is real, and it's more than a network. I think that I always hate the term networking, but these are like collaborators and people that will support you and really are keen to have conversations and like help you in any way they can. And that will continue, you know, far beyond the time that you're a student. So any point in your life you're making a transition, reach out to the Blue Devils.
Not much more to add. I just to echo both Robyn and Sarah. I mean, recent alums 2 to 3 years prior had gone through that transition, slightly different times, picking their brain on what they looked out for and some of those options and where they found themselves then to sort of foster a network. And for me, it wasn't actually full professors. I mean, they were helpful, don't get me wrong. Assistant professors who had just transferred into Duke because they went through that process as well. That was most helpful from a job market perspective.
And then for me, a little bit outside of the Duke world, one of the things that I like maybe 6 months or 7 months after graduating was I started to volunteer for and help out in nonprofit organizations that were kind of either professional associations or involved in the field that I was working in. And so an example of that is that there was a group in DC that was focused on public service and supporting students that were coming in and doing internships in public service, either on the Hill or for federal agencies or for nonprofits. And so I had been working with the Department of Health and Human Services at the time, but that was a really great opportunity for me to build some more leadership experience, to be able to talk about that in the future, and also give back to a lot of folks that were coming right after me that were interested in working in the public sector.
Thank you so much. So I'm hearing, you know, making use of existing programs, both in and outside of Duke, as well as networking and connecting with alums. Would anybody like to share, because we do hear from students that they have some hesitation reaching out. And I think, Sarah, I think it was Sarah that mentioned that people like helping students. So definitely, wear that student hat when you're reaching out to folks. But do you have any other advice on what was particularly helpful in trying to connect with people, especially during the challenging time period where you were making a career transition?
I think being specific in a request is always helpful. If someone reaches out to me and has a specific question that they'd like to talk about, a specific shared interest or some way that they acknowledge they know who I am a little bit and they want to have that conversation with me, then I'm much more likely to engage. I'm the type of person that answers all the emails. I feel a great sense of guilt if I don't, but I think some people can just, pass through the emails and not be bothered. I'm more likely to answer very quickly if someone has like a specific thing that they want to talk about. And I would say too, don't hesitate to cold email people as well. I know it's kind of looked on strangely, and there's a lot of hesitation around that. As I've arrived in a new city, I just moved to Berlin 3 months ago. I set up a spreadsheet for myself that included all the international schools where I might be able to teach, all the theaters where I might be able to compose, all the education departments that I should reach out to in theaters. And I've researched all of them and then emailed the appropriate person at the department. And sure, a lot of them haven't responded, especially since we're in a lockdown right now. But a lot have, and I have more career opportunities and have had more conversations with potential collaborators that even if nothing happens immediately, something could happen down the line than I ever would have if I just waited for the job to pop up.
Sarah, you're much better than I. I will admit that I'm horrible about email. So but importantly, to echo Sarah's point, look for even a second or third sort of order of association, and in any hook will sort of significantly help, at least in my opinion, of getting that conversation and that networking picked up. And I'll make sure to email you if I'm in Berlin, Sarah.
One thing I will add it's career advice I received after I graduated, but someone said, after you have the conversation, always write the thank you note, which I think is just good form. But then someone told me to add and finished it with, and if I can ever return the favor, please don't hesitate to ask. And it's such a small thing, but I think it, one, kind of shows that you're interested in having this kind of symbiotic relationship, but two, you would be surprised how helpful you can be to other people. So I've had people ask me, not Duke alums, but, my kid really wants to go to Duke. Can you tell me what that experience was like? Or, I know somebody who wants to try this industry. You've worked in that, or this person. And it kind of creates this more organic relationship that I think can be really, really great.
Yeah, I think that's really true. The other thing I would add is if at the end of the conversation, you can add a question of, are there other people based off of the conversation that would be relevant for me to talk to, that you think would be interesting for me to introduce to? Like either way, even if it's something where I can help them or they can help me, that's usually helpful. And I'd say, you can send out 1 million requests and only get like 3 or 4 back, but if you can get those 3 or 4 and keep building on them, then it starts to work, right? And that's what really makes a difference in the networking game. And so don't be discouraged if you don't get a lot of responses back. It's just the name of the game is with this is it's a little bit of a numbers thing, but once you get a couple going, it becomes a lot easier.
Great, thank you all. This is a little bit of a hindsight question, which I have mixed feelings about asking because, hindsight is always 20/20. But as you think back to that transition period in 2008, is there anything that you think would have been good to try to do a little differently? Anything in particular that you learned that you carried forward with you for your next potential career transition? Just any lessons learned from that experience?
So I'll go back to something that Sarah suggested, and this is relevant because I changed jobs in April of 2020, which is at the beginning of this pandemic. And so I, for some unknown reason, had decided to go search for a job at the beginning of last year. Living in Seattle, seeing the COVID cases tick up, going like, yeah, I'll go and find a new job now, right? And so the things that really worked for me that Sarah mentioned as well was I had a very organized list and a spreadsheet of people that companies that I wanted to talk to, individuals within that company that would be interesting for me to network with, and then whether or not they were second or third degree or first degree connections and how I would be able to get to those companies. Now, I wasn't able to talk to all of the ones that I was interested in, but it certainly opened the door in terms of like getting me in front of people and getting a conversation going. And it turned into opportunities, quite a few of them actually, which was great. And so having that structured approach, which was not something I did in the first go around of this in 2008, I think was extremely helpful in this go around in 2020.
One thing that I wouldn't shy away from, and it will be slightly different per field in terms of applicability, recruiting sort of networks, not answering everyone, but, getting, finding recruiters that that you value and would have your best interest in mind has sort of served me well collectively over a decade now at this point in time, both for myself, picking up the call to Cristian's point, I will for them and give them suggested names. That's the network I think has served itself 10 times over, and I did it sort of leaving in 2008.
So we're hearing that from Cristian and Sarah, spreadsheets are good, be organized. Mike is re-emphasizing kind of linking back with the network, even recruiters that have been helpful before, and making sure you're keeping those relationships going. So thank you for those tips. I want to go back to something where, and I think this feeds into the, would you have done anything differently? Because someone mentioned, I definitely had that moment of panic where I thought I have to get a job. When we think about being comfortable with uncertainty, what was that like for you? Can you think back to that time of, was there anything that in the moment made you feel a little bit better about not knowing the future? Or was that something that was just really, really hard? Because again, this is something we hear from students of, I want to know exactly what my next steps are, as we all do, right? But was there anything as you were making this transition, or since you've made subsequent transitions, that allowed you to just feel a little bit more comfortable with not knowing exactly what was coming next?
I still deal with career uncertainty and being okay with that piece. So I'm not going to pretend like it's not still there. That's like my very nature. And I realize now, I forgot to mention what I'm doing as an attorney. So I worked at a law firm for several years as a labor and employment attorney. And now I'm the general counsel of a big charter school network in Chicago. So that's my practice setting. But I think in terms of kind of getting used to the uncertainty, Sheryl Sandberg uses the analogy of a jungle gym versus a ladder. And it's a point that's been made before, but I really can't emphasize it enough, as when I find myself in those moments of panic, I try to remember, like, it's a jungle gym, not a ladder. I would have never predicted that I'd be in the seat that I'm in today. I think my husband found the job posting and I was like, why would I ever be a GC? Like, what are you talking about? And now I love my job and could have never predicted it. And I think it's also a point that was kind of raised before, just in terms of, like, you just don't always know the future. And if you know that you're directionally going in the right place, that can really count for a lot, right? Because it's not going to be that kind of linear progression. Sometimes it's just, am I pointing in the right way? Is there a possibility for me to get to where I want to be in 10, 15 years? And like others, I tend to think about my life in 2 to 5 year increments. So I do the evaluation of, okay, what's my new 5-year plan and things like that. When I graduated, it was do consulting for 2 years and then go to law school and then create a new 5-year plan.
I'm also really terrible with uncertainty. I'm to the point that, like, my dissertation is about musical theater and how musical numbers create this sense of open-ended possibility. But I think I wrote that largely to teach myself a lesson that, like, life has open-ended possibility and it's so really challenging. I think for me, the biggest transition has been realizing I was never meant to be a full-time anything, and being a full-time something gives you a degree of certainty, but I don't function when my life works in just one job. I need to have multiple facets of my life going at any given time. And the only way to do that is to freelance. And as uncertain as that is, I know that I'm not going to be as fulfilled as a human being if I'm not sitting in that uncertainty, but also sitting simultaneously in possibility.
Yeah, I continue to be uncomfortable with the uncertainty. It happened, when I was leaving engineering and computer science. It happened in April when I was leaving consulting. And you look back and things seem to fall into place and the story becomes very clear. But in the moment, it never is. And it's okay. You'll figure it out. It takes some time, but when you look back, things will start to come into clearer focus. And so I would just say, it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to feel like you're not sure where you're going, as long as, to Robyn and Sarah's point, you have a sense of where you want to end up. Generally, I think that's the thing that's really important.
And Cristian, if I could ask you a question about something you said earlier that's related. You mentioned that for you, as long as things were, kind of along the lines of what you wanted to do, that was okay. How did you make that decision that something fell into that trajectory? How did you evaluate whether or not something fell into that overall trajectory for you?
Yeah, so I figured out what it is that I wanted to do when I was working at the Department of Health and Human Services, which is, said very basically, try and figure out a way to improve healthcare for everyone. And I found that out because I was trying to run away from something, which was computer science. Like, I knew I didn't want to do that. And so essentially I was like, well, my girlfriend at the time, who was also a Duke alum, found a random job posting, much like Robyn's husband did, for a division in Department of Health and Human Services that she had interned at, and was like, hey, go check this out. It's a little bit different. Maybe you'll be happy. And so I gave that a shot. And I just kind of figured out that I really loved working in a field that had impact on people and bringing together technology to transform the way that healthcare was being delivered. And there's a lot of aspects to that are interesting, one of which is policy, which was where I was focused on. But there's also pieces around that related to financing from the venture capital side. There's a strategy and operations angle to it in terms of how do you actually run the companies and bring these products to market. There's a product development and research side in terms of figuring out how those actually get handled. There's a customer engagement side. So I didn't necessarily care what function I was in. I just cared that I was doing something that combined healthcare and technology and made the world a better place. And I was like, okay, if that's true, then I just need to look at the company, understand what they're doing. Does it make sense to me? And if it does, then I'll figure out a way. It doesn't matter what I do. I'll just work there and figure it out from that point. That was the way that I had kind of put my North Star up there and chased after it.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful for students to hear that too. Again, how do you make that determination? Does anybody want to tag on to anything you just heard from Cristian? I know I kind of jumped in there. I don't want to cut anybody off. Do you have any other thoughts?
Maybe just briefly, the way I view it is there's ambiguity is here to stay. We have to find sort of tools to deal with it. The way I think is sort of approached in terms of helpful is to break, there's different time horizons and therefore the appetite to take on ambiguity. If you have a mid to long term, Robyn's 5-year, 2-year, whatever it winds up being for every individual, that's a little more palatable, at least to me, than the next sort of 6, 9, 12 months. So that versus, the other axes of sort of skill sets. So a little bit to Cristian's point, if you don't care exactly what it is, but generally the phenotype that you're looking to sort of step into in the next sort of time frame, what are those building blocks? It might not be a ladder, it might be, the playground. What are the building blocks you need to get there, and where can you get them? What does it look like? And it could look very different, but then the end result be where you want to be, roughly, or change along the way.
And to piggyback on that as well, I think that company culture, like Cristian was saying, it sounds like you wanted to work at this company largely because it was doing something you believed in, but also it sounds like it was just a nice place to work. The people that you're working with on a daily basis matter so much, and you want to be sure you're surrounded by people that you can collaborate well with, that you want to spend time with. They don't have to be your best friends, but you want to be in a culture where you feel valued and where you feel like your opinions are heard and where everyone is on the same page largely.
Thank you. So we're hearing this theme of trying to become comfortable with being uncomfortable as much as possible. Yep, the ambiguity is here. And you're hearing from the panelists that it's okay to feel uncomfortable, that that uncertainty, it's a little bit of human nature to not feel great when you don't know exactly what the next steps are. But I love, Sarah, one of the things that you said was, sitting with that, but also sitting with possibility. So kind of framing it in a different way so that it's not focused so much on the uncertainty, but the openness to possibility. That was really neat. So when you all transitioned into your next role, this was actually a question that was submitted from some of our participants. Did you find that there were knowledge and skill gaps just because perhaps you were going into a field that you didn't anticipate you were going to be going into because of the market or whatever the situation was? Did you find that there were knowledge or skills gaps when you transitioned into that role? And if so, how did you navigate that?
I think I can speak a little bit to that. So when I'll talk about the pivot from being in a law firm where I was a specialist doing one type of law all day, and I knew that law very well, to going into this general counsel position where I was expected to be much more of a generalist. So getting questions on labor and employment, but also corporate governance and real estate and intellectual property and school law. And I mean, just the array was a lot. And I'll be candid, right? In those the first 12 months, I was overwhelmed. Like, there are just so many things. And I was like, there are so many laws. I don't know all the laws. Like, I know a lot of laws because I had to learn for the bar, but I don't know all the laws. And then you're trying to apply them to the facts in your situation. I think it's a few things. One, I think you have to be committed. Well, three things. One, pick a good employer that's going to give you that grace and realizes that you're on the jungle gym. Two, always be committed to kind of self-education. So I would buy books and try to teach myself these things. And there's nothing like on the job training, but I think trying to really educate myself was important. I have, both my husband and I have like tons of books where we just like read about our industries. And I would say three, and this was kind of not a shock to me at the end of college, but hard work doesn't stop when you finish school, right? Like I think on some level, I thought, you know what, I'm going to grind it out at Duke and I'm going to grind it out in law school. And then when I get to my career, I'm going to work hard, but like the time of going at 9 to 10 is over. Like, and that's not really true. And to be clear, you pick your career with the lifestyle you want in mind, right? Like, there are some folks I know who are going 12 out of 10. They are very high powered and that's the life they want. And it's awesome. But I would keep in mind that if you want an interesting career over the long term, you're always going to be learning and you're always going to be uncomfortable and that you're always going to be working hard. You'll have periods where you feel like, okay, good, I got it. And then if you're at a good employer, they're going to keep pushing you and you're going to be like, oh, now I'm uncomfortable again. Now there are new things for me to learn. So those would be the things that I really focused on in terms of kind of making that next leap to the next job.
I would agree with Robyn. The self-education is so important, and it's why we're Blue Devils. Like, we love learning and we love continuing to learn. I've had so many moments in my career, especially moving countries, right? I was doing the same job basically as I was in the US, but the UK has a completely different educational system. So I had to learn what GCSEs and A levels and all of these different systems were. Now that I'm in Germany, I'm learning German and I'm loving it. But there's so many different sort of barriers that you will hit up against. And instead of seeing them as barriers, they are great learning opportunities and opportunities to just keep engaged and keep progressing and learning throughout your whole life.
I will say one of the things that has been really helpful for me, in addition to having a growth mindset, is being able to fall back on my Duke education, which is primarily related to the notion that even though I studied electrical, like engineering, and I'm taking it to other fields, there are things that are common as you progress in your career. And so these things are your critical thinking skills, the ability to frame up problems in the same way, understanding how to do research, figuring out how you actually go talk with people and get things done, project planning. All of these are consistent transferable skills that they're not specific to engineering or to consulting or to management or to business. And so being able to rely on those capabilities that you've built over your time at Duke and apply them to your career as you go, I think is a part that's really, really important as well.
Yeah, just a point of emphasis for me. I mean, prior to coming to Duke, where it was sort of deep technical sort of training, expertise, scientific in nature, my undergraduate degree is from a liberal arts sort of school. And so those two together sort of, I think, are the most important learning lesson for me anyways. you can have the technical aspects, and you can have this sort of deep sort of educational background from wherever you came from. It's how you apply it. I mean, that's really that transition to the real world. And it's not as clear cut, and it's going to be messy, and perseverance through that sort of transition is going to be the most important thing.
Great, thank you. We're going to go through maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll open the floor to our participants. One question that came through from our submitted questions was if you have any advice for international students at this point. And I understand that's, that's a specific population, but if you have, experienced it yourself, or you operate in a hiring fashion where you could speak to that in terms of international students. We, you probably know, have a high number of international students at Duke. So is there anything when you think about navigating a career transition, if you feel comfortable addressing from an international perspective? And I know some of you are living internationally right now. So any thoughts on that?
I can't speak particularly to the US situation. I'm wanting to stay in the US. I have found it unbelievably challenging getting a visa, and I have so much more empathy for international students and for anyone who decides to make a move outside of their home country. It is unbelievably difficult. You have to have a crazy amount of organizational skill in order to make it happen. And you have to really want to stay in a certain country in order to make it happen, I would say. So be sure that the country that you're committed to staying in feels like the right cultural fit for you, feels like the right job fit for you. Otherwise, it's a lot of work, and it might not be worth it, if I'm being very honest. When my husband and I made the decision to move to the UK, we had no idea what we were in for, and the amount of money and the amount of stress and turmoil spent in that process. I don't know that the UK was worth it for us, because ultimately it was not a cultural fit. No matter how many times you visit a place, you don't quite know what you're going to land in on the other side. And in terms of theater, it was great. In terms of work culture, it was not for us. We've just landed in Berlin, and we are only able to be here by virtue of having just been in the UK, because they're not allowing US citizens in right now otherwise. And we are so grateful that we had that loophole. This is a city that we would have not landed in otherwise, but culturally, it feels like it's holding us in a different way. And it's much more open in terms of the visa process. If anybody wants to chat about visas or the situation, I'm happy to do so. I wish I had more insight on the US situation. But it is, the big thing I will say is that it's really challenging with visas how much they are tied to full-time jobs. And I think that cuts out so many great people who should be able to live and work in any given country. Berlin, actually, there is a freelance visa here. Otherwise, we would not be here. But it's incredibly challenging unless you are tied to a very specific job, and it limits you so incredibly much that, again, you just have to be very committed and be certain in your decision.
The other thing I'll add from a hiring perspective, again, given the industry, we sponsor from a visa, from a green card perspective, very often. It's incredibly competitive. So independent of the normal competition associated with any open position, that adds a layer of competitive aspects and sort of considerations from a hiring perspective. By no means we shy away. Talent wins at the end of the day, but just know that there are quite a few, an increased number of people looking for those sort of sponsorship positions. And so it's something, maybe coming back to some of our other comments, what's that edge you're going to bring from a sort of connectivity point of view, from a network point of view, from your hook or angle point of view is going to be important.
Great, thank you so much. What I would ask is, as we transition into participant questions, do you have another final piece of advice for anybody on this call right now? Of you're trying to find a job, you're job searching in 2021, here would be some of my best tips or my advice for you, and then we'll open the floor to participant questions. But just final thoughts of maybe that didn't pop up in a previous question that you'd like to leave with our group today.
I don't know if it's entirely new, but I do think it should be emphasized. The sun will come out tomorrow. At our graduation in 2008, it poured rain. I remember being sopping wet, sitting in my cap and gown and just being so heartbroken. I was like, I'm leaving Duke and it's raining and this is how it's ending. But the sun will come out tomorrow. And I think remembering that you're, have focus, but be open-minded. And that your first job is not your forever job, I think is really, really important, because for many people, they're going to do other things and the sun will come out tomorrow. So kind of staying positive is what I really focus on.
Cast a wide net on your vision board. I think you've heard that from us today. Don't maybe necessarily zero in on a particular, exact job or job description or role or title.
Anything else? We feel like we've covered it. Okay. Well, thank you all again so much for rolling through those questions. Wanted to leave, so we've been going for about an hour now with me moderating. I'd like to open it up now to students or other participants who are on the call right now to look at their questions. So it might be easiest to use the chat if that works for you, or if it's something that you want to unmute for, that's fine. I'm going to check the chat actually right now. We do have one question. How will storytelling, or how can it be applied to the tech industry, where technical knowledge and metrics are usually what they look for? Advice on that, storytelling when you are trying to transition into the tech industry or a technical field.
I would say that storytelling is an addition to the work, to what you're bringing to the table from a technical sense. I mean, yes, it's important to know and pass all of the code reviews and the coding exam, but also in addition to that, if you can tack on the piece of why you're there, what the story is, what you bring to the table, I think that's the value of it. It's not going to, in a technical role, it's not going to replace your technical capabilities, because that's like table stakes for your job. But if you can get that much further in terms of describing how you bring something to the table that's different, I think that's where the storytelling piece comes into play.
Completely agree. I think the technical expertise and depth sort of gets you in the door. I think as I sort of weigh hiring, there's a cultural fit, there's an EQ aspect of it, and that's where the storytelling comes in. Selling yourself, but also sort of where you might fit into the organization.
Great, thank you. That's great advice. We have another question. Great question. How do you stay confident and motivated in the face of rejection or uncertainty?
I think it's good to remember that all it takes is one yes to make up for all the rejections oftentimes. If you're a freelancer, it takes a few more yeses, but soon you'll amass, a bulk of people that you're collaborating with and opportunities that'll keep rolling for you. So it's very hard at the beginning when you start getting rejections. But all it does take is that one yes, and oftentimes it will come from the place that actually you are the best matched to, which is a gift.
Yeah, the other thing, I think that's exactly right. The other thing about this too is remember that a rejection from a job or an opportunity is not an evaluation of you as a person. That's absolutely not what it is, right? There's a lot more factors that go into it that are external to your control. And so it's really hard to do this, but if you can remove the way that you think about, the job offer not happening from your value as a person, I think that's really helpful. But again, like I said, it's hard. It's really tough to be able to separate that, because, you look at it and you're like, I didn't get that promotion, I must not be worthy, I must whatever. That's really not the way that I think the evaluation committee or the hiring panel is thinking about you in that way. There's a ton of other factors. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, the pithy analogy that I like to use is that finding a job, getting promoted, it's like dating. Like sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't, and it's not always personal. And like Cristian and Sarah said, it can be so hard not to take it personally. But in my own career, when I've gone back to it's like dating. This is not personal. It's just, things weren't always a match. It really kind of helps center me.
That's great, thank you. Not internalizing rejection as a reflection of your personal value. Absolutely, yes, important thing to emphasize. Next question. How do you narrow down a job or career when you have multiple interests and you're still figuring out what is the best fit. Thoughts on that one?
This is the exact problem I had. When I came out of Duke, I had degrees in English, music, and theater. Throughout my PhD, I continued to sort of study across all the departments. I didn't entirely know what career path I wanted to take. I ended up talking with a composer that I really respected in New York. Just like cold emails, if you were an arts person, or if you're an admirer of a professor or whoever it may be, don't be afraid to go up and say, I really admire your work. Can we have coffee sometime? So there's a composer, Michael Friedman, who agreed to have coffee with me. And I loved his work because he was a brilliant dramaturg and composer and music director and all around sort of creative mind. And I said, how do you do all of this? Everybody wants to sort of pin you down. What are you, right? Everybody wants one answer. What are you? And he said, the thing is, you have to choose at first. And then once they see that you can do that one thing, you can do more. So I think I hate giving that advice in many ways, because I know people are incredibly multifaceted and are capable of doing so many things. But if you can choose one thing to make the center of your practice for now, whatever that may be, whether it's in the arts or whether it's in the sciences or math, wherever it may be, choose one thing to center you and then keep the others revolving. And eventually it will kind of spiral out and you'll be able to do more things. But it is very challenging when people do want to sort of pin you down to one thing for the time being.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other thoughts on that? Anybody else experience, I have multiple interests and I'm not sure how to use that?
I guess maybe back to one of my initial comments, the way I view it anyway, for better or for worse, is again, back to the stepping stone analogy and not closing any doors. So, you can always pivot. Some pivots are harder than others. Some backtracks are, take more from a career perspective. So practically speaking, the way I would view it is, what is there a common theme to your variety of interests? And is that the skill set you can think about building first as you sort of work through where you might want to go next?
Great, thank you. Other questions from the audience? We have any tips for leveraging experiences or skills that are outside of research to show how they translate to the job you're applying to? So sounds like non-research skills, but how to leverage those and experiences to show that those transferable skills when you're applying to different roles.
So I think I can start on this one. And Rachel should know this, another plug for the Career Center. I went and had my resume reviewed and I said, I really want to go into management consulting. I was a political science major. How do I convince this consulting firm that they should give me this job when I didn't study economics? I don't know any accounting. And the resume reviewer really helped me kind of go through the job description and say, these are all the things that you need to be able to do as a consultant. And here is how you did them as a political science major. You need to be able to research. You need to be able to explain complex ideas to non-experts. You need to be able to use good judgment. And so I would really sit down with the JD or the posting or whatever position you want and really go through and kind of highlight the skills that they're looking for, because I'm going to bet more of those are transferable than you realize. Cristian made a really, really good point that the toolkit that you have is really skills-based, right? It's the problem solving and the communicating, and that really tends to translate across a lot of jobs.
I would also add to that, be sure your cover letter is very specific and very explicit about how you are the exact fit for that job. And that kind of fits into the question about what do you do with many skill sets as well, with many different interests. Anytime you're applying to something, you've got to completely rewrite that cover letter and ensure that it is catered exactly to that position and that you're proving you have the skill sets for it. I think that goes a long way, because eyes can glaze over in reading a resume. It's important to have your skill sets highlighted and sort of bolded. Cover letter similarly, like even sometimes I do bold things within my cover letters to be sure that they see what is most important and why I'm the best fit for a position.
Thank you so much. For those of you in a hiring position, do you have thoughts on that? If you have someone who doesn't have the exact background or expertise that you're looking for, how do you weigh or evaluate transferable skills, and what stands out to you in their application materials?
It's a little back to the storytelling bit. I will say, and maybe Kat, maybe I'm not in the position to answer if it's outside of research, but back to the earlier conversation, for my sort of world, there is a technical sort of barrier to entry, generally speaking, for most roles. You can come from different technical backgrounds, and if you can apply that depending on the level of the role, then that's where this cover letter, or that's where that EQ conversation and drawing from past experiences. And for me, it's, a recurring theme here. It's problem solving. So how did you fix something that's going to be applicable to this role in a past life, past experience? What do you bring to that table above and beyond, the sort of core requisites?
Great. Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Cristian. I just saw you on mute.
Oh, I was just going to say that from a hiring manager point of view, I typically look for past instances or examples where the candidate has demonstrated some sort of relevant experience. And so if it's like, hey, the role that I'm hiring for is someone that understands strategy in the healthcare space and knows healthcare tech, right? And so you would think, oh, if you've worked in this field before and you understand, you've been a strategy consultant and you know healthcare super well, and that would be a shoo-in for the position. But actually, there's other things that you would look for. So for example, if the person has done or had an experience where they've applied critical thinking skills to another industry, they've ramped up on it really quickly and demonstrated in the past that they were able to do that, then I feel pretty confident that this person would be able, or this candidate would be able to come in and do the job as well. And so that's kind of the thing that I look for as a hiring manager is past experiences where you've described something that's kind of similar and shown success in that role.
Great, thank you. And we talk a lot in the Career Center about the value of impact statements and results-oriented descriptions on the resume. And it sounds like what we're hearing is if you can provide that evidence, even if it's not in the exact same field or industry, that's helpful just to make sure that people can see the qualification, those transferable skills. Great question. Other questions from the audience? Okay, so we have a question. If the panelists have any tips for transitioning to a more technical role from a non-technical role.
Rachel, can you repeat just the first part of the question? Sorry.
Sure, yeah, no problem. The question is, tips for transitioning to a more technical role from a non-technical role. So I guess coming from a position where you don't have a lot of technical skills or use it or need it, but that's where you want to go. You want to use more technical skills and be in a more technical field.
I think Robyn already Robyn, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask a clarifying question. I guess it depends on the industry, because there are some where I think you can do self-education and get yourself there. And there are others where I think you probably will need to get a certificate or a degree. So I was going to ask for more specifics if the student is able to give them.
I'm just waiting to see if there's going to be more details. Does anybody want to add more general thoughts while we wait to see? Oh, okay, here we go. Looking to transition into UX, UI design.
So I went the other way, so not super helpful because I went from a super technical thing to non, but working at Google, I work with a lot of UI UX people. So there's some observations, which is with technical roles, there's usually something related to a certification or some education that's needed to get you the table stake capabilities so that you can actually do the job that's required. So understanding what those are and taking the lessons or classes or ways to do that, either through a formal education program, which will then grant you a certificate to demonstrate that you have that technical know-how, or alternatively, building a portfolio of work that then demonstrates that you have that capability is very important. So either one of those, I think, are helpful. If you go the education route, typically you end up with a portfolio of works that you can share with people. And so that kind of shows what you're up to. That I've seen or observed just seem to work over where I am, but not being a hiring manager over UI UX people, please take my advice with a grain of salt.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on what might be in that kind of portfolio of experience that you were describing? What might be included in that? What would that look like?
Yeah, so let's say you are, so I'm going to fall back on where I came from, which is coding. With coding specifically, you can go through a bunch of like the AI boot or the coding camps that are out there now. You could go get a formal education in computer science or computer engineering. But from a portfolio point of view, there's a lot of, you can have your own projects on GitHub. You can have your own projects kind of built out and coding projects that you can use to demonstrate things that you've done. I would imagine that that's similar from a UI UX point of view, where you can point and say like, look, I've done some UX studies, I've done some UI studies, I've designed a website, I've designed something else, or a web application that people have used, I've designed an app. Having those in your back pocket to be able to show folks and kind of walk through what your design process was, how you thought about it, how you problem solved it, I think is really important. And that's what I mean when I say a portfolio.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, we have another question kind of about making these career pivots and transitions, if anyone can weigh in on it. So a participant is into technical program management, software specifically, trying to pivot into analytics instead. They're pursuing an analytics course in Duke right now, but just curious if there's any more advice about how to successfully make that type of pivot from software to analytics.
So I think education is part one, which you're already pursuing, which is great. I think part two is understanding the business, and that comes with networking is kind of where my head goes. And so I would surmise that your immediate circle or professional network is probably folks that are in the software or technical program management group. And so being able to figure out ways to branch out beyond that into the analytical community is where I would go next. And so figuring out who are the data science people that are kind of working in this space, who are the machine learning people that are kind of working, presuming that's the analytics you want to do. Like, that's the space that I would go into, find the communities, and pre-COVID, I would have said find the meetup groups, but clearly that's not happening anymore. But I think that would be my next protocol in order to make sure that not only do I have the education side down and the project side down, but I know the right people that can then, kind of get me into a job afterwards. Because I think one of the things that folks expect out of these AI boot camps that isn't so successful is they're like, we're going to go through it and then there's going to be a job. Like, here it is. Like, I'm going to go right into one. And that just doesn't happen, right? And so being able to source those opportunities for yourself, I think, is important.
Hey, this is Anthony. That question was from me. So to be a little more specific, right? So yes, networking is one aspect of it, finding the right kind of network. The other aspect is in terms of in the job per se, like once transitioning to the job based on the new skills that I've acquired, is it like, my question is like, should I go take a tech PM space in a tech PM role in analytical projects to start with, then slowly pivot into analytical space, or is there still opportunity that I can directly get into analytical space after I finish this based on the technical background I have?
I think, okay, tough answer, because it kind of goes back to the jungle gym that Robyn was talking about. There's no clear path in terms of which one is the best one. And I know that that's going to be a wholly unsatisfactory answer to folks, but honestly, there's no clear path, right? And so you just kind of have to try it and stick to your guns and hope that one way is good, and talk to enough people to get a sense of, does this make sense for you? Because the right answer for you may not be the right answer for someone else.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know, Robyn and Cristian, if this was a mantra when you were at the Career Center, but we often say, it depends. And that's the answer. We joke about like making t-shirts that just say, it depends. And I know, again, it is an unsatisfying answer, but sometimes that is the best answer, because it can very much depend on your personal circumstances and the field. And so, yes, thank you for that. Yes, I understand.
I also say it a lot as a lawyer. It's also wholly unsatisfactory to people, but sometimes it really is true.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, so we do have a question about if the panelists would be open to being contacted after the panel. If you are, what I can do is to all attendees, I'll check with the panelists afterwards just to see who's comfortable with that, and then their best contact information, and I can send that out to the attendees if that works, if that answers the question. I'm seeing some thumbs up from our panelists, so it looks like they are open to being contacted. Great. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I might ask if the panelists are okay, if we could hang out just a little bit as our participants exit. I'd like to just chat with you and debrief a little bit. To our participants, if you could join me in thanking our panelists so much for their time and their wisdom, their insight, their perspective. I've been in career services for over a decade. I always learn something from panelists. I learned a lot today, so thank you so much for this. Our participants are welcome to exit the meeting at this point, and thank you so much for coming.